After you've submitted your NUTBAL sample and we've processed it and have produced either your standard report or advisory, we will either email or mail it back to you depending on the option you selected when you were creating your profile information. So to go back, check on that, you would look at your account, your property details, select the property that your sample would be under, and here at the send report via, you would have chosen mail or email. You can change this at any time. Just remember to select that option, hit save, and the next time we receive a sample under this profile, we will email it to you. After you've received your NUTBAL report, and let's say you either delete the email or lose the sheet of paper, you can go at any time into your NUTBAL account and access that report. So you would go under your Samples tab and go to this Reports drop down, and you will see all the reports in this Properties history. All of the completed reports will be a brown row all the way across the table, and in this example, we have a red box that says the sample is not processed yet, which means this sample is still going through our system. Above the table, we have all of these icons that you'll see in this table, and you can also hover over the icon on the table as well to figure out what you're clicking on. But if you want to access your results report, which we'll do in a second, you would click on the full case report. It can be broken up into its standard report and mediation report, or just the NIRS results. You can also look at your sample form, and that's the generated copy based on the sample description information submitted with your sample. If you have any physical paperwork or a physical sample sheet you submitted with your sample, we will scan it in and it will be accessible through this icon as well. If you click it, it'll automatically go to download that file. If you click any of these other icons, it'll just produce a pop-up on your NUTBAL online screen. And so I'm going to click this full case report because we're going to go through today how to interpret the data you'd see in your standard report. So this pop-up will appear, and this is going to be the same results that we would send you either as a physical copy or through email, and you have the option down here to print it or to email it back to yourself again. And so you just hit that, and it will go to the email associated with your account. And as we start to go through the information on the standard report, these first two sections, so this directly under standard report section and then current animal condition, those are just going to be summaries of the parameters you described in your NUTBAL online sample description. And for more on that, you could see the last video we produced, the sample description NUTBAL online tutorial. And remember that this animal profile that you see, even though it just appears as it's describing one cow, it's actually the representation of all the cows of this age, breed composition, stage of reproduction in this herd. So we could say that the average cow in this herd is going to have a body condition score of 5, is going to be an average of 6 years old, 30 days pregnant, and an average of 120 days post-calving. So this next performance section is where NUTBAL model comes into play in the report for the first time. So as a culmination of the fecal NIRS data for forage quality and the animal and land parameters that were provided in the sample description, the NUTBAL model estimates the change in body weight and body condition over a 30-day period, assuming that your forage quality stays similar to the conditions when you collected your sample. NUTBAL evaluates the diet quality relative to your herd's requirements and then estimates what is limiting animal performance from a protein and energy standpoint so that you could make protein and energy supplemental feeding decisions. First, you'll see this weight change goal, and that's actually information that you provided in your sample description form. So if you wanted the animals described by this animal profile to gain weight, it would show here. In our case, we just want these animals to maintain their current weight. The next section is the predicted weight change, and so this is the actual performance value that NUTBAL's calculated. For this sample, it's showing a loss of 0.35 pounds per day. It could also show 0, or it could show a gain. And then the next line identifies the nutrient limiting animal performance. So this would be interpreted as there's a deficiency in crude protein in their diet, and that's causing these animals to lose weight. And then NUTBAL just carries it out over 30 days, so what you would expect your animal to weigh after 30 days of losing the predicted weight change, and the body condition score after losing that weight. Some things to note here is that if you see a value in red, it's indicating that the performance goals are not being met. So, as you can see, these animals are losing weight, they're dropping body condition and dropping weight, and our performance goal was for these animals to maintain their weight. That's why you'll see the weight change and the weight and body condition prediction values in red text. And I'm going to pull up another sample report as an example here as well. In this report, just to briefly go over, we have an 8-month-old Brangus steer, and what you're seeing in the performance is that we want it to gain 2 pounds per day, but it's only gaining 0.18 pounds per day. Even though they're still gaining weight, it's showing up in red because they're not meeting our weight change goal, as well as the body condition score is dropping, and that's why you'll also see this body condition score in red as well. Another thing to note is that this performance limited by information identifies the first limited nutrient. However, in a case like this, where they are growing animals, they would likely also, after meeting their protein requirement, continue to be limited by energy. So that's just something to keep in mind as well as the type of animal, age, stage in reproduction, or your forage quality as well. That might impact the nutrients needed to meet a weight gain goal. On the other hand, so I will pull up another example report. So here we have a mature cow that is gaining a little bit of weight, and our weight change goal was for it to maintain weight. And there's nothing in red here, so this is an animal that's performing well and meeting all of our, or exceeding the desired performance. There will still be a performance limited by factor, and in these cases it's always going to be energy, because you can always add more energy to help that animal gain more weight. It might not be efficient or necessary, but it's still the performance limiting factor technically. So that's why you'll still see a performance limited by nutrient described even in these scenarios. So let's go back to that first sample with the mature cows that are 30 days pregnant, 120 days lactating, and just losing a little bit of weight. The next section is the feeds applied section. So for this sample, I had added 1 pound per head per day of distiller's grains, and if you didn't have any feeds added, it'll just appear blank here. Another thing is that if you have added a feed, but you didn't put an amount for amount fed, it will also appear blank here. This next section is our daily nutritional status description, and it goes into more detail breaking down just how much nutrients that NUTBAL predicts your animals are consuming versus the requirements that it has calculated based on your animal parameters, and it breaks down exactly what your limiting nutrient is and how much, or how much your animal is consuming in excess of their required nutritional value. So this intake value is the number predicted by NUTBAL, and then the requirement value is based on the animal parameters like breed, stage of reproduction, stage of growth. It's also influenced by how much activity your animals have per day based on your pasture information, as well as any sort of severe weather information that our weather station sources have picked up based on your location. First is crude protein, and for this sample you can see that they have a negative balance of crude protein, so they're showing that they're deficient in 0.07 pounds from meeting their requirement, and that's reflected again in this performance limited by. That's why you see it in red, and that's the cause of this weight loss. NEM stands for Net Energy for Maintenance, and it is a metric for describing the energy contribution of this feed to your animal's maintenance requirements. And so that's the requirements of your animal to basically exist, for it to keep its weight, to keep its body functioning properly. And NEM is described in units of megacalories or mcals, which is actually converts to 1,000 kilocalories, which is the equivalent of 1 calorie that we think of when we see calories on a nutrition facts label on human food. Now, if both of these values, your crude protein balance values and your NEM balance values, are positive, then that's describing that your forage that your animal is eating is meeting its requirements and your animals are maintaining or gaining weight. If your NEM value is negative, but your crude protein value was positive, then what you would be seeing in this performance limited by would be limited by energy. And then next we have the net energy available for gain, NEG, and that is going to take your balance of excess NEM energy, if you have that in this diet, or if that has been calculated for this animal profile, and it will convert it to this other energy metric. So net energy of gain describes how your feed will contribute energy to weight gain by your animal. And you'll notice that there is a difference between these two values. They're not exactly the same, and that has to do with an efficient conversion. So once we start putting fat on your animal, the process of converting energy to fat is not as efficient as it would be to just maintain your animal's current body weight and current condition. You wouldn't see a requirement because we just calculate the requirement for protein and energy on a maintenance level, but you would see this is the amount that you have available for your animal to put down as gain. But as in the case with this sample, we're not seeing any gain because protein is the first limiting factor in your animal's diet. If both of these were positive, then you would see some weight gain. And something you could do with this number is you could calculate the amount of protein you would need to supplement. So if you had a feed and you knew that feed's crude protein concentration on a dry basis and you knew its wet conversion, you would actually be able to calculate how much dry feed and then convert to wet feed that you would need to ultimately be providing that 0.07 pounds of protein to your animal, and that would address this protein requirement and weight loss. The next section is dry matter intake, so it's breaking down NUTBAL's animal performance prediction in terms of what actually your animal's consuming of types of feeds. So it's broken into concentrates, which is any added concentrate supplements that you've included. Roughage refers to any added roughages, so if you did add a hay or silage in the feeds added section of your sample description, it would appear here. And we don't generally recommend adding in your roughages to your sample description unless you're intending to add some sort of roughage feed and to see how that will affect your animal performance. And for more on that, refer back to our sample descriptions video. And then this forage number actually has the forage intake that NUTBAL predicted your animal will be consuming, with the intake values coming from both your animal's physical parameters, so its frame size, its stage and gestation if it's a gestating animal, and then it also is going to consider diet quality information from the fecal sample, which we'll get to in a minute. And the next value, if you have an animal that is lactating, you'll see a calf intake value. And the calf is included as a cow-calf pair, is generally considered a single unit when we're talking about stocking rates or feeding your animals. So dry matter intake is going to be described as actual pounds, as a percent of your animal's standard reference weight, as well as an animal unit equivalent. And an AUE, or animal unit equivalent, is just a standardized descriptor of intake. So an AUE of a 1 is equal to 26 pounds of dry matter intake, or a 1,000 pound dry cow consuming 2.6% of its body weight. This next section is diet quality, and this is the actual fecal NIRS results from your fecal sample. So when we analyze it, we predict for forage crude protein and DOM, digestible organic matter, which is our energy metric that we then convert into NEM and NEG for our nutritional status section. And then we produce just a simple ratio of these two numbers, the DOM-CP ratio, which is another sort of metric that is an indicator of rumen efficiency. So we have the forage only, so this is purely the nutrients provided by the forage based on your fecal sample analysis. And then if you've had supplemental feeds, it is calculated into the overall diet quality values, and so since we supplemented a little bit of distiller's grains, it bumps up the protein and DOM values a little bit, and that drops our DOM-CP ratio. As I mentioned before, the DOM-CP ratio indicates rumen efficiency, which basically refers to the balance of carbon to nitrogen in the rumen and how that balance affects rumen microbial function. The rumen microbial population is a significant source of protein and energy for your cattle, and maintaining a nutrient balance for a happy and healthy microbe population is really essential for achieving your performance goals as well as just feed conversion efficiency. So we generally say that an optimal ratio is in the range of 4 to 7. If the ratio is less than 4, that's describing that there is excess nitrogen or likely protein, but insufficient carbon or energy to maximize microbial activity. So if they're on very, very lush pastures, but they're not able to consume enough roughage or get enough carbohydrates in their diet, then that's when you'll be seeing the low, less than 4 numbers in your DOM-CP ratio. On the other hand, if it's greater than 7, that indicates that there is excess carbon, or excess energy sources in the rumen environment, but not enough nitrogen available to fully utilize that. Being outside of this range, this 4 to 7 range, doesn't necessarily indicate a nutritional deficiency, unless you're very, very far outside of that range, but it does indicate that your animals could be more efficiently using their feed resources. And it's sort of up to your, as the manager's discretion of addressing this ratio. Also addresses a performance goal, then it's probably worth it. But let's say your animals are maintaining their weight and that's all you need them to do. Your animals are probably just doing fine, just not as efficient as they could possibly be. The next section, which you'll only see again for your lactating animals, is the daily milk production section. So it's just a brief little section that describes the potential production based on your animal's breed and stage of lactation and the actual production. So that's a prediction based on your animal's nutritional status. So right now, likely just because there's a very small deficiency, NUTBAL is predicting that cow is pulling from her own reserves to keep up to her total potential milk production. You might see it decreased if your animals were more deficient in a nutrient. Also, as part of our fecal NRS analysis, it predicts the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen in the fecal matter itself, and this information is more for calculating nutrients returning to the system. And the next section we have is the model weather. This is the climate information that NUTBAL pulled from the National Weather Service and various stations throughout the country. And this last section you may or may not see, depending on if there are any staff comments. Like for instance, for this one, I wrote in it's a fake report for training purposes. You might also see comments up in your comments section at the top of your report. And I forgot to mention this earlier, this comments section is actually the comments from the pasture section of your sample description form. If you submitted it online, these will be the comments that you wrote in. If you've submitted a physical form, there's a comment section there that we will try to reproduce when we enter your sample information here. It might be abbreviated based on our character limit of that comments box. We might also have comments here as well if we had to make any sort of edits to that sheet. For instance, we had to adjust a weight or body condition score or frame score to match our model's built-in body condition score, frame score, and weight calculator, or if we have just any other comments that we would like for you to know as we are filling in your sample description from your physical form. And the next section, and I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit more in a later tutorial. This is our nutritional mediation report. So you'll see it if you entered in feeds and all of the relevant feed information. So if you remember back on that description page or the adding feeds page in the sample description, there's an option for minimum amount fed and a max amount fed in cost per day. And so this nutritional mediation report appears if you've entered that information and there's a nutritional deficiency for that animal profile. So you could see a nutritional mediation report for if you have more than one profile. You might see them for all of them. You might see it for just the one that has the nutritional deficiency. For this profile, it had that little bit of weight loss, the 0.35 pounds per head per day. And it was already receiving 1 pound per head per day of distiller's grains. What the nutritional mediation report is telling me in this first section is that I could be feeding 1.4 pounds per head per day, and then there's going to be a little bit of waste depending on the value that I put in the feeds portion of the sample description. But ultimately, this is the amount that's needed to address my protein deficiency. And for it to calculate this number, it doesn't show it here, but what I actually, when I had entered that sample, put a maximum of 8 pounds per head per day and then a minimum of 0. So when it calculated this, it was constrained to that minimum and maximum amount, which fortunately didn't need much more to meet the nutritional requirements for my animal to maintain its weight. And then down here, if you had multiple ingredients, it would describe almost a ration, but since I just have the one, it just goes through and describes how much they're eating per day, how much the herd will need per day based on the size of your herd, how much your animal needs per your 30-day grazing period and prediction period, and then the herd for that period. And then it will do a cost of supplements. Again, if you're feeding multiple supplements, they would show as a list. As I'm feeding one, it goes through that same animal per day, herd per day, animal per period, and herd per period breakdown of the cost of feeding these distiller's grains. And this section just actually refers back to the a nutrient balance breakdown that we saw before. And finally, so again, you might not see this mediation report if you didn't have any added feeds. You would just see next the straight NIRS report. And it's just a small summary about your sample, and then the actual NIRS results only. So your protein, DOM, the ratio, and the fecal nitrogen and fecal phosphorus. This last bit is just kind of a short review of the things that we just talked about. Again, if you would like to email it back to yourself or print it, you have the option to do so in this bottom right corner. And that's it on interpreting a standard report. There are a few more things going on this page, like this rerun case button. If you wanted to go back or needed to change any information on your sample description and rerun the NUTBAL performance model, you'd be able to do that here. So I'll be talking about that in our next tutorial. Thanks again for listening. I hope this information was helpful, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions as you're interpreting your reports. Feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call, and we're happy to help with that.